Hello and welcome to this exam skills pit stop for the GCSE poetry. As part of any exam preparation, you should be practicing writing essays and checking you're using the skills the exam board want to see to achieve the grade you want. Just like an F1 car, no answer is going to be perfect on the first time of writing it. So it's really important that you check through your responses in mock exams or practices you've done at home or in lessons for the key skills the exam board actually want to see. In this video, we're going to look at some of the key areas that students normally make mistakes with and how those could be rewritten to improve the chance of success in the test. This is a copy of the exam criteria the exam board use then to mark your work. Lots of detail here, lots of key phrases like analyse, thoughtful, evaluate for the highest grades, appropriate understanding, some understanding, simple comments are also there down the bottom. But let's break this down into something a bit more usable. You're assessed for three key areas, AO1, AO2 and AO3. AO1 wants you to provide a thoughtful response with considerable engagement with well-chosen direct reference to the text. What that means the exam board are looking for is for you to look past what the poem is about and think about how its themes and ideas inspire and really affect you. The examiner wants you to think and feel something as you read the poems they've given you. AO2 is where you increasingly analyse the language, form and structure, looking at effective stylistic features and subject terminology. To pass the test, they want you to look at how effects or ideas in the poem are formed through language choices and poetic techniques. The examiner expects most of these to come from you talking about the words being used, but form and structural choices are also effective and interesting things to comment on. AO3 is the relationship between the text and the context. For AO3, they want you to link to the knowledge you have about the poem and the poet to the poem itself. Why was it written? How were the themes personal to the poet? How does the poem link to what the poet was going through when he or she wrote it? All of these are important questions which begin to tackle why the poem was written in the first place, something that the exam board would want to see you say if you're looking to gain a pass grade from your exam. Now, what I ask my students to do is highlight their work, looking for these key areas the exam board are looking for. You can see 4 areas there colour-coded on the screen. AO2 is where you highlight where you've used a direct quote from the text, normally indicated by quotation marks. This is a check on how frequently you're using evidence, but evidence doesn't have to be a quote. It can be a device or structural technique. For example, saying there are stanzas in the poem and what shape or form those stanzas take is a piece of evidence you commented on. AO1 or AO2 looks for references to the reader. This could be written in a number of different ways. The reader, I, we or us all count as references to the reader. By linking to the reader, you're beginning to focus on the effect of the evidence. This makes me think. This makes us feel are the kind of sentences I'd probably expect you to be using. AO1 references to the writer, and obviously we're talking about poets, all the different poets here. By linking to the writer, you're beginning to address the writer's reason for writing. Heaney wrote this poem as, Wordsworth began to explore the theme of, are the kind of sentences you would use. And lastly, AO3 links to context. For the poetry, you'll also mark for the background knowledge of the poet or the time the poet was written, so it's important this is included in your answer. All 4 of those colours should be there about 3 times per paragraph as a minimum. When you have an answer in front of you, please highlight it using the colour coding described. Another good way of looking for how the grade is created is looking at the phrases that you're using within your answer. A select example of this is on the board there. The weakest ones are the ones in red, the ones on the left. This shows and this tells us both imply you're going to give a really basic response. You're going to say exactly what a word means or the poem is about. The ones in amber, the phrases in the middle there, this implies and this suggests a slightly higher level. They both suggest to the exam board that you're going to give an opinion, something you might think or feel when reading a quote. Both those tend to suggest maybe a grade 4 then. The best ones are the ones in green. This confronts us with, this challenges us to think about. These phrases suggest that you're thinking deeply about the language choices being used and have been affected by those choices. If you were to take out the word this and put in the name of the poet, obviously that would get you a mark for using the poet's name, thinking about why he or she was writing, and the word us also links to the reader. So lots of good ways to get marks from those phrases in green, all of which show a thoughtful approach. After marking hundreds and hundreds of pieces of work that students have written over the years, I've noticed certain key areas that seem to be errors that are being made. Here are 5 of them. The student doesn't make enough points about the character or theme. They're dependent on only 1 or 2 things that they remember about the poem, rather than the many different things that could be interpreted. Forgetting that some marks are awarded for comments on form or structure. All too often, a student will just focus on language choices rather than the form or structure of the poem itself. Not making a clear comment on how a theme develops in a poem as one stanza links to the next. Not really explaining the effect of a word choice and or technique used. Not mentioning or linking to the writer's message or reasons for writing. Quite a common one, that last one. It's really, really important that you make clear why the poet actually wrote the poem itself, rather than just saying what it's about. We're now going to look at some examples from a variety of grades and discuss how improvements could be made to each one. This is example A. As you can see, I've already colour-coded it in the way I've already described. From the outset, William Wordsworth explores the passing of time by introducing us to his fun playtime outside in the Lake District. We know William's parents died and he liked spending time with friends. Good use of context in the first 2 lines, clearly showing this candidate knows quite a bit about William Wordsworth's background. The lexical set of frost, rapture and loud challenges us to think about happiness and joy. Well, that's a bit more debatable. Is it a lexical set? Well, to be a lexical set, all the words have to have something in common, and they should all be the same kind of words, all adjectives, or all nouns, or all verbs. In this case, that isn't true, so to call them a lexical set isn't quite accurate. I'd be perfectly happy for this student just to say a group of words instead. I wouldn't take the risk of necessarily using the word lexical set. I like the fact they've said challenges us to think about, as it shows they're being affected by those word choices. And actually what they've said, happiness and joy, is accurate, but it'd be quite nice if they explained it in a bit more depth. So I might want the word because to be added there and justify why happiness and joy are formed from those 3 words. The quote, the cottage windows through the twilight blazed. Good quote, nice length to it, so I can look at individual words later, and then they've gone on to explain it. This is important as he mentions that he wants the cottage to burn, forcing us to imagine terrible things, but he is still a child. Well, that explanation doesn't quite work. What are these terrible things? It's a bit vague. Does that quote show terrible things? Not so sure. We've then got this reference to the fact Wordsworth is still a child. That sounds like this candidate's got a good idea, but haven't really explained it. Why is it important that he's still a child and watching twilight blazing? That really needs a bit more evaluation there. The adjective blazed forces us to imagine that he hates his grandparents and wants to be free. Well, yes, he does. He does hate his grandparents, but I'm not sure the word blazed really tells you that information, so I'd worry about what's been said about the quote there. I can see the attempt at analysis, but deeper thought needs to be given on that particular word choice. The reader would feel sorrow and empathy for Wordsworth. Well, yes, good effect on the reader is clearly stated. On the other hand, well, this is a comparison essay, so it's a nice comparison connective used there. Seamus Heaney explores the passing of time by disgusting images of nature. Now, the grammar there isn't great, but certainly the thinking is quite good. Heaney does use a lot of disgusting images. We know Seamus hated nature, so this might explain the passion for Heaney's speech. I like the idea that the candidates notice that Heaney is passionate about his topic, but the way it's worded is a little bit vague, and so might need rewording for that sentence. The lexical set, sods, punishing and gargled, all quite negative words, but are they all the same kind of word? No, sods is a noun, punishing would be an adjective, and gargled is a verb. So 3 different kinds of words being used there. They all force us to imagine disgusting and almost make us throw up. Well, true, they are all quite disgusting, but I wouldn't write an exam answer that they make you want to throw up. Make you feel disgusted and want to physically react to what Heaney is Heaney is describing. The quote, "All year the flax stem festered, green and heavy-headed in the flax rotted there," is a good quote and a good way of shortening it too. This quote is important as it challenges us to think about how Heaney thinks everything is constantly rotting. He thinks about the negative. Again, I like the fact they've noticed that the words there are indicating things constantly rotting, but he thinks about the negative as, again, very vague. I'd want that explained. The words heavy-headed is very important as it forces us to imagine Heaney's school teaching, thinking he's not educated about nature. Well, the quote doesn't really indicate school teaching, nor does it indicate him being not educated by nature. Heavy-headed, I think, implies more depression or sadness than anything else. The reader would feel quite disgusted about how Heaney words his sentences in a way that makes us gargle. Not so sure about that. Makes us react, maybe. Makes us hate nature. Would also be quite accurate. As the poem develops, Wordsworth explores passing of time by hunting and running and chasing himself and his friends. Is a good beginning, as they're beginning now to focus on the next section of the poem, and the answer goes on from there for about another 4 paragraphs. 2 targets then that I give for this work: not making a clear comment on how theme develops, and not really explaining the effect of a word choice or technique used. I've emboldened the beginnings of each paragraph there, the point the student makes before going on to the evidence. The opening of each section should start with a comment for each part of the poem. Well, that much this student's done, linking to the question set, but it should also show how a theme develops or changes, rather than simply label what happens in each section. So down here, I'd want this student to say how the theme of time passing has been developed since the beginning of the poem, not just what Wordsworth goes on to say about running or chasing himself. So I need a lot more connections between the beginning, the middle and end of the poem to really bump the grade up. This then might be the changes I make. I've crossed out the original version and rewritten it to make the structure of the poem a little clearer. From the outset, Wordsworth explores the passing of time by inviting us into his winter wonderland of his childhood and ignores his carers trying to force him inside. In contrast, Heaney also explores childhood as he's focusing on a pond on a hot summer's day and how it decays with the passing of time. Those would be then the 2 comparisons I'd make then between the beginning of Wordsworth's prelude and Heaney's Death of a Naturalist, clearly focusing then on the beginning of each poem. I then move on to my next paragraph by beginning with, as the poem develops, Wordsworth begins to focus on his feelings of freedom and excitement. Notice there I'm saying that Wordsworth is changing topic by the beginning, by the middle of his poem, and using phrases like begins to implies then that the poem gives me much more detail, and it's actually giving it the idea that a theme is developing through the poem rather than just concentrating on different elements of it. A task you could do with your own answer then is to look at each section of the poems. How do they help explore the message of the poem in a different way? You will need 3 different answers for each part of the poem. So you need a response for the start of the poem, the middle and the end, but showing how what happens at the start affects the middle and then goes on to reach a suitable conclusion by the poem's ending. Now let's look at how the quotes are used to tackle the second target I would give. We have the lexical set there. Well, we know lexical set isn't quite accurate. We notice now that the quote is explained in about a sentence. Quote number 2 is explained about a sentence. The adjective blazed, the response to that is 1 sentence long. In short, each quote is only explained in 1 sentence. So there's clearly a lack of depth here regarding how much they could say or how much they could explain about each quote. Let's take this apart a bit then. I've labelled up the first couple of quotes that are used. What could I say about these? Please pause the video and think what you'd say about them before I go on to explain my responses. Well, these first 3. Frost, rapture, loud. These are not a lexical set as they're all different word classes and don't quite fall under one heading. But this group does create the atmosphere of excitement and mystery of childhood. Frost sounds perfect, like a postcard of winter. Rapture is an extreme, almost religious excitement, and loud again links to excitement. So all of those do have something in common, but they need to be better explained. Wordsworth creates an image of a beautiful cottage with sunlight glinting off the windows, is what that second quote could tell us. And then when looking at the word blazed, this might suggest or challenge us to think about a beautiful fire that's impressive and huge, perhaps implying that Wordsworth's inner anger at his family inside the cottage. So I've used my contextual notes there, but really thought about why the word blazed was chosen. Let's look at the second set of quotes then from the second paragraph or the second poem. Sods, punishing, gargled, all year the flaxdown festered, and lastly the analysis of heavy-headed. How could we improve the way we explain the effect of particular word choices or techniques used here? Well, once again, that first set is not a lexical set as they're all different word classes. But this group creates the impression of a grotesque situation that's unnatural. Sods are clumps of grass, punishing is a reminder of pain or torture, and gargled is a disgusting sound that's made by draining something. So I could explain that they have a grotesque effect as a group of words. That would be fine to tell the exam board and would get you a lot of marks as you group quotes together. The second one, Heaney challenges us with the imagery of a once beautiful scenery decaying because the language is disgusting and full of horrible images and senses. The alliteration used here exaggerates this feeling. I've used the technique alliteration, but I've explained why alliteration would be appropriate. Well, it helps exaggerate this feeling of decay and disgust. Heavy-headed. Heavy-headed implies bowing down or depressed, as if a once beautiful grass is now being lowered by its own sadness. This shows I understand the exact words, heavy-headed, rather than just relying on what I know about the poem as a whole. This is a critical error in the exam for any text. Plan the quotes you want to use. Think very carefully why these precise words were used in the first place. Think about, what do these words remind you of, and how these thoughts link to the poem they're in. So if I was to brainstorm heavy-headed, I look at the word heavy and think something low down, something sagging, something difficult to move. The word headed, I might think brains, I might think thinking, I might think of the mind in some way. Now I use those ideas and try to link to the poem itself. That's how I then make sure that I'm definitely responding to the exact words used when I'm analysing a quote. Example B. At the beginning of the poem, Heaney shows that the disgusting features of a pond are staying the same and don't differ over time. He shows that it is nasty when he states, all year the flaxdown festered. This shows that, although time is going on, the unfortunate demeanour of the pond stays the same. Festered sounds nasty and disgusting, as if the senses are sickened by the rotting nature. It shows that, though the IRA are manipulating the way people think and making them sick, but also showing that every day goes without a change. In the prelude, shame they didn't compare them here really. In the prelude, Wordsworth shows that although he knows growing up is inevitable, the joys of happiness and staying young is going to last. By using happy time, it implies that when childhood is arriving, it will be unsettling. We are challenged to question this if this is because both his parents died in early adulthood and perhaps concerned what will happen to him. As both poems continue, the theme of passing broadens. You can see this candidate hasn't really compared the poems. It uses much less quotes than the first one. They've tried to explain the quotes, but they've only done it in one sentence each. And it's some of the linking to the context isn't quite accurate. It needs to be improved a little bit with maybe a bit more revision of this particular poem or pair of poems. 2 comments I'd give. Two targets I'd give. Forgetting that some marks are awarded for comments on form and structure, not mentioning or linking to the writer's message or reasons for writing. There are also other problems here that could easily be corrected. A lack of comparison between poems, a lack of any links to the reader could also be targets I could set. There are very few quotes in this response, and only one example of analysis, so marks need to be picked up by using structure or form instead. Structural form comments could include the title, any rhyming or lack of rhyming, sentence structure, any enjambment, the form the poem takes, if notable, stanza use, any whole poem repetition, and any rhythm or iambic pentameter the poet tends to use. So any one of those could get extra marks without any more quotes actually being needed. I've now added in the notes on structure in a kind of orangey beige colour. At the beginning of the poem, Heaney shows the disgusting features of the pond as staying the same but don't differ over time. He calls the poem Death for Naturalist, as he used to love nature, but due to its disgustingness, now feels his love is dead. He shows that it is nasty when he states all year the flaxdown festered in the heart, 2 dashes indicating the end of the line. This shows that, although time is going on, the unfortunate demeanour of the pond stays the same. Heaney uses in Jumble at the word heart to exaggerate how personal the poem is and suggests the rotting isn't just the pond but his love for nature as well. Festered sounds nasty and disgusting, as if the senses are sickened by rotting nature. It shows that, although the IRA are manipulating the way people think and making them feel sick, but also showing that every day goes without change. In the prelude, Wordsworth also shows that he knows growing up is inevitable. The joys of happiness and staying young is going to last. It is called the prelude as it is a poem that covers his whole life, and this section is part of a life that made him. By using happy time / showing where the line splits, implies that when adulthood is arriving, it will be unsettling. The Wordsworth used in John Mummel happy time to show how important this part of his life was. It is as if it was the only time he felt he enjoyed himself. We are challenged to question if this is because his parents died in early adulthood, or he is perhaps concerned it will happen to him. As both poems continue, the theme of time passing broadens. You can see I've used some quite easy structural techniques here. I've commented on the title of both poems, and I've also looked at where the line splits are. So I haven't changed the quotes, but I have thought in more depth about why I chose the quotes I did and what other things I could comment on other than word choices. Okay, now I need to add in the writer's message or the reasons for writing. This I've done in blue. So if I now read the bits in blue, you'll see what I mean. Heaney has challenged us to think about nature's beauty being a myth. He wants to destroy the photograph of nature and present us with what nature is really like. Wordsworth wants us to understand how he was shaped as the writer through key moments in his life, and wants us to share his joy and excitement of when he was young. In both cases, I've stated clearly why the poem was written and what effect or what the poet wants us to think about. That would be another way of quickly adding marks without learning any more quotes beforehand. All the poetry videos cover the meaning of the poem and the message of the poem. Go away and revise those, making sure that you know all 18 poems and the messages behind each one, ready to write them in the actual exam. Okay, my full response, and if I put all those ideas together, is now on the board, showing just as many quotes, but a lot more depth of understanding, linking structure and writer's message. Example C. At the beginning of the poem, Wordsworth suggests he doesn't want to go home to his grandparents, and that he doesn't like. The quote, "Through the twilight gloom the cottage windows blazed," suggests he wants to stay outside with the beauty of nature and not go home to his curfew. This make the reader feel worried that Wordsworth doesn't want to go home. The word blaze suggests his house burning, meaning he doesn't have to go home. Shame that idea was repeated, really. That sentence really just repeats what's already been said. I'd much prefer it if they comment on the effect of the word blazed, rather than just its meaning, that he doesn't want to go home. The words sun, happy and rapture suggest he's overly happy when he's outside in nature. This suggests that time is passing relatively slowly. On the other hand, Seamus Heaney does suggest he is in love with nature as he is young. The quote, "All year the flax down fest in the heart of the townland," suggests the grass is decaying. You've just told me that he's in love with nature. Surely that can't be right if he immediately starts the poem by talking about decay. This suggests time is passing slowly as nothing's changed as nature is decaying as normal. The words sun, delicately and butterflies suggest peaceful and calming. The word heart suggests he really cares about nature and that it has a place in his heart. We'll try not to repeat the same words of the quote in the explanation. The word heart, place in his heart, just tells me the same word twice. I'd want real thought to go into how the quote's being explained without the need to actually repeat the quote itself. In the middle of the poem, Wordsworth creates an image of himself being more negative towards nature. This exam candidate looks like they're just repeating the same ideas. They need a much more detailed understanding of why the poem was written. Although this response clearly understands the poet quite well, each response is written as a statement. Key factors to improve. Ensure the best ideas are explained using words like because, for example, to ensure the examiner sees an exploration of the poem. Be clear to explain the different effect of word choices. So here it's all about how quotes are being explained in as much detail as possible. Let's break this down then. Immediately you can see each sentence on a separate line, showing what I just said, the fact that each quote or each point is made as a simple statement of no more than maybe 12 words. Some of these have to be explained in more depth. I've added that depth then in kind of beigey brown colour. The quote, "Through the twilight gloom cottage windows blaze," suggests to us he sees his cottage in the gathering dusk, and instead of feeling comforted, he sees it as a place of anger because of his feelings towards his grandparents. This would make the reader feel worried that Wordsworth doesn't want to go home, as he wants to stay away from the place he sees as anything but his home. The word blaze suggests his house burning, as if he wants us to imagine the room that his home is on fire, metaphorically suggesting that he wants a new start away from the people who raised him. The words sun, happy and rapture suggests he's overly happy when he's outside in nature. This suggests that time is passing relatively slowly because he is desperate for us to see that he wants the day to never end. Look at your exam response, find some sentences there and add explanations to one or two of them, thereby showing depth of understanding to the exam board. Last example D. From the outset in the prelude, Wordsworth begins with the image of a sun. The line "when the sun was set" shows this. The use of enjambment here shows that time moves quickly as he is excited. The group of words, rapture, happy and loud, demonstrate how he found nature a place to be free and enlightened. The quote, the village clock toiled 6, forces us to reflect on how he's had a curfew. This ends the fun he's having, inviting the sadness to return. On the contrary, in Death of a Naturalist, Seamus Heaney creates an image of happiness being destroyed and damaged by time. The quote, all year the flaxdown festered in the heart, forces us to reflect on how his love and happiness is being cast aside. The word festered shows that over time flaxdown is getting ruined. This linked to how he felt about the IRA in England. The group of words, sweltered, punishing, shows its slow pain, something you can't do anything about, like your happiness, it will happen no matter what. At the end of the prelude, the sun is mentioned again, the sky of the evening died away, as if the day is over, along with this happiness and fun. Notice they've got the beginning of the poem and the end. They have explained some points in that beginning section. They've used loads of quotes, but once more explanation could be given. More words like because and as to explain the points. This person then has not made enough points about the character or theme. And you can see that this candidate might want to revise this poem in a bit more depth. You can see what this candidate is trying to do, but there is a bit of work to be done in understanding what the poem in a context. There's very little on context in this actual answer. The things you have to say about the poem have to be accurate. So I think this answer was on the whole well written, but they simply didn't know enough about the poem to be able to really write it well. Now I've crossed out the bits in red that aren't quite accurate and added in bold there the word context, question mark, where context really should have been. Okay, this idea of inviting sadness to return. Well, why is Wordsworth feeling sad? Well, that links to his grandparents and his parents, presumably, and how they controlled him in the Lake District. Those are the bits then that I would deem as being wrong and might need rewriting to improve the grade. Now you can see all the places I've added because in, the different places where this answer could be added to. When the sun was set shows this because. The use of enjambment here makes us think about how we found nature a place to be free and enlightened because. Heaney creates the image of happiness being destroyed and damaged by time as he explores how something. All year the flaxdown festered in the heart forces us to reflect on the slow decay of ... Have a go at answering some of these sentences, thereby easily developing the grade from this response and showing that you can elaborate and begin to evaluate the meanings behind the words that are being chosen. Having done that, you could also add a bit on structure. Could you add something about enjambment here? Could you add something about the paragraph structure, the stanza structure? Could you talk about the kinds of sentences being used? Improve word choices to use a more higher level connectives. So some of those original phrases I used in green could also be added here to make this a much more effective answer with minimal extra revision. As part of any exam preparation, you should practice writing essays and checking you are using the skills the exam board want to see to achieve the grade you want. In each of the examples today, we've looked at different weaknesses in them and thought about how those weaknesses might be addressed on the second attempt. Obviously in the exam you only get one shot at this, so it's important you're really confident the kind of sentences the exam board want you to use. By practicing, you're ensuring success when you need it the most. You don't read the poems just before the test and then expect to do well. You read the poems through, you make notes on the ideas they have in them, and you practice writing those out, checking your work as appropriate. All sports stars do the same, F1 cars do the same thing. You should do that to be successful in the test. Thank you very much for listening.